After finishing the Halo Infinite campaign, I was left very satisfied and slightly confused. This is how I would summarize my overall experience with the game, but there is so much more I can say. In this video, I'm going to break down my personal thoughts on the story, the characters, the world, and so much more. Since Halo Infinite just released, this will be a spoiler-free review video, and I will be heavily enforcing this in the comments. Before I begin, please don't forget to comment, like, subscribe, share, and hit the sub bell for future video notifications. To start, I'm setting a standard for myself when it comes to making review videos. In the past, I've made review videos that received tons of criticism for being too vague, being too short, or not fully consuming the full experience. I'm changing that with this video. For this review video, I'm going to discuss the following topics on screen. First, yes, I played the entire main campaign and experienced a lot of the open world component. In total, I spent about 13 hours for my first playthrough. 8 to 9 of those hours were the main campaign missions, and the rest would have been the open world activities that were available. One of my biggest concerns when it comes to open world games is how flooded your map becomes with side objectives and random events. I was afraid that Halo Infinite would make the same mistake that Far Cry 5 made. When playing that game, I was constantly running into randomly spawned objectives that had little to no benefit to you. Fortunately, this wasn't the case for Halo Infinite. Most of the side objectives and random activities were marked once the nearby fob was captured. This made going from mission to mission easier because I wasn't constantly notified of random objectives spawning in front of me. The best part of the open world is that none of the side objectives are required for the main campaign. The benefits for completing these side objectives are really good because they give you access to better equipment to use, but you will rarely find yourself needing it. It's nice when you unlock the BR or maybe the gun goose, but you don't need them as they can be found throughout the world. The game also adds tons of weapon spawns and ammo caches that can be used to find ammo. The characters of Halo Infinite are very much alive. Unlike in previous 343 entries to the franchise, the characters of Halo Infinite actually feel human. Well, at least the human characters do. The trio of Master Chief, who has always been a brick wall with the gun, the pilot, and the weapon, created a personality dynamic that hasn't been seen since Halo Reach. The same thing happens in Halo Infinite. Master Chief has always had a solid facade filled with confidence in his ability to do anything. He was trained to be a soldier and is devoted to protecting humanity even if it cost him his life. The pilot is basically the exact opposite. He ends up being a reminder that not all humans are Spartans, but all Spartans are still humans. This scared and isolated individual wants nothing more than to return home safely, but Chief is constantly reminding him that they need to fight in order to save home. These two alone are basically the two pieces of a puzzle that combine together to make what it means to be human. The weapon was a little different, as she is a relatively young and vulnerable character. She has no idea of what happened and therefore has no idea the danger a Halo ring presents. She would often see the beauty of the world surrounding them, but was oblivious to the danger. Her innocence would eventually grow and change as the story would enter its final act. By the end, each character had changed slightly, showing us that Master Chief is indeed capable of expressing human emotion, that non-Spartan humans can still be brave and strong when facing certain doom, and that human-like AI are maybe more suited to teach us to be more human than to be used as a weapon. There isn't much to say about the enemy characters in this game. Each individual enemy character didn't really amount to one big enemy. To me, it felt that having more than one antagonist hindered the overall threat of what was happening. You had Cortana, Atriox, Escharum, the Harbinger, and Jaga, but these 5 characters together didn't feel the same as the overall threat of the Gravemind and Prophets in Halo 2 and 3, the Didact in Halo 4, or the Warden Eternal in Halo 5. These main enemy characters were more persistent and, for the most part, the center of the threat to the main character's goals. Spreading this role to 5 different characters hurt the game just a little bit, especially as the final act started to answer a lot of questions about the nature of each character's goal. I was left just a little bit confused as the game came to a close. I'm definitely not saying that any of these characters were poorly written. Escharum Malone is definitely one of the best boss characters in Halo, but the way the game juggles around these characters was a bit off-putting for me. When it comes to Spartan equipment, this is what made the gameplay for Halo Infinite so much more fun than previous games. If you are like me and you like the option to switch between traditional and fast-paced combat, the set of equipment you will find allows for both to be possible. The grapple shot was easily the most useful equipment in the game. Unfortunately, it really did overshadow the other equipment and their usefulness. There are some equipment that can't be replaced by the grapple shot, but aren't necessary to play the game. The thruster was almost completely useless in my opinion, as the grapple shot can do the same thing and so much more. Once fully upgraded, the grapple shot was basically all you needed, with the occasional drop wall and threat sensor. That being said, it is entirely possible that not all players will spam the grapple shot as much as I did. If you prefer the older style of gameplay, you will probably find yourself using and upgrading the drop wall and threat sensor faster more, and relying on your sprint to move around. You have the option to use whatever equipment you want and can upgrade what you prefer. This will allow you to choose the gameplay style that you like the most. Without spoiling anything, Halo Infinite is definitely a well-crafted story and easily 343's best so far. From the very beginning, I was getting that nostalgic feeling that you would get from the earlier Halo games. You were playing as Master Chief, you had a threat to neutralize, and you had an arsenal of familiar and new tools to dispose of your enemies. While the new Spartan equipment allowed for varying the gameplay, you still had the traditional gameplay to accompany the story. It still felt like a classic Halo game with a fresh coat of paint. The familiar Forerunner environments reminded me of those classic Halo levels of exploring the Halo rings. Since it is the first time we are playing on a Halo ring since Halo 3, it really adds to the nostalgia factor throughout the main missions. You will start the game with a lot of questions, and you will see that a lot of them get answered by the end. There are a few major moments that made my jaw drop, as big story reveals were pretty common in the final act. Throughout the game, you will encounter whispers as you try to figure out what happened on Zeta Halo. These bits of dialogue and sometimes a full hologram draw from the events of pretty much every Halo game except for Halo 3 ODST. There are even moments in time that have never been in a Halo game. Moments that have only been written about in the lore or the books. The way these whispers are used to tell the story of what happened leading up to Halo Infinite and the events that happened on Zeta Halo is basically 343's way of reminding the player, whether they are new players or Halo veterans, that there is a rich and vast story to tell. These moments from before Halo Reach to the events of Halo 5 and beyond helped answer a lot of those questions and helped to further develop Master Chief's story and grow the weapon's understanding of her purpose. With the game closing in a final boss battle, I felt rather confused. The final hour, the story had a lot of information to take in and process. The pacing of things seemed to pick up a little too fast by this point. The final scene left me with new questions and few answers. It's possible that I missed something in the ocean of dialogue, but regardless, I was still satisfied with the ending. Although it ends up being a cliffhanger, I don't think this is the end of Halo Infinite's story. Outside of the main story, there's a large list of audio logs to discover, answering questions about characters that are missing throughout Halo Infinite. If you are curious to see what happens to these old or new characters, you're going to have to explore Zeta Halo yourself, as there are a lot of audio logs to find and a lot of ground to cover. Now that I've discussed the game's major topics, I want to share my personal thoughts and conclude this video. To start, there are quite a few things that I loved about the game. First, it was a new Halo game. The previous gaming generation was tarnished with the release of Halo 5. I think a lot of returning players will appreciate Halo Infinite's attempt at balancing the classic Halo storytelling, enemies, and gameplay with the open world and new equipment. The weapons in the game, for the most part, are incredibly fun to use and very satisfying. The story itself was very well crafted, as it took moments from previous Halo games and integrated them in a way that kept me wanting to play more. With the open world and the linear missions being separated and not dependent on each other, it was nice to see that the boss fights and other smaller open world mechanics integrated very well into each mission. For me, what really caught my attention the most was the trio of characters that I grew to love, or grew to love even more. Master Chief will always be the center of the Halo universe, but even a brave super soldier can have layers beneath their armor. There are a few things that I didn't like and were already mentioned before. The main antagonist role being split between multiple characters kind of made me wish that we had a main enemy like the Didact or the Gravemind. Although the main enemies in Halo Infinite vary in rank of importance and focus, they are still great characters with strong motives. The only problem being there was only one spotlight, but there were too many contestants. I also didn't like how I felt confused with the events of the final cutscene. Like I said, maybe I missed a line of dialogue that would make it make sense, but the ending was just a bit lacking. I'm hopeful that a new story release will explain it a bit more, as the post-credits scene posed new questions left to be answered. The final thing I didn't like, which wasn't too big, was that there was a clear point of no return entering the final act of the game. About 2/3 of the way through the main story, you are locked out of the open world until you finish the game, preventing you from doing side objectives that could help you unlock equipment upgrades. Maybe a little warning next time. Overall, Halo Infinite is definitely worth playing. It is one of my favorite Halo games, up there with Halo 3 and Halo Reach. It takes the familiar environments, enemies, main character, linear story missions, and weapons, and balances and combines them with the new enemy characters, an open world, new equipment and weapons, and so much more. The story itself is definitely one to remember, as it is the culmination of the last 20 years of Halo's story. All throughout the game, I felt so nostalgic, but it was balanced with all the new things to enjoy and discover. It doesn't feel too nostalgic, while at the same time, it doesn't feel too new. It's Halo at its best with a shiny new coat of paint on it. Maybe a bit too shiny in some places. It wouldn't be right to give Halo Infinite a number rank without doing the same for all the other games. Here are the ranks I would give each of the main entry and spin-off games, not including the top-down ones. I will not explain why I rank these games like this, as I kind of already did at the ending of my live stream playthrough. I also don't want this video to be too much longer. I will explain why Halo 5 Guardians isn't lower. Despite being a poorly received hot mess, Halo 5 actually serves a huge purpose in the story of Halo Infinite. The ending to Halo 5, which, spoilers for a 6-year-old game, ends with Cortana taking the Guardians and effectively putting the galaxy under martial law. The events of Halo 5 are addressed in Halo Infinite and become more intertwined in the final act of the game. This alone makes a bad game more mediocre. It elevates it just a little bit higher based on how important it is in the story of Halo Infinite. With that, I leave you with my rank for Halo Infinite. Without co-op, I feel like this game will be a bit worse for some people, but the experience alone is very deserving of this rank. Hopefully, I did a better job of reviewing this game. Please do let me know if you think it was still lacking in some ways. There are big video game releases next year, and I don't want to screw up those reviews like I screwed up the ones for Destiny 2 Beyond Light and Back 4 Blood. Please be critical of my critiquing of the game. It will only help me grow and get better at it. If you made it this far in the video, please don't forget to comment, like, subscribe, share, and hit the sub bell for future video notifications.